My name is Angel Thornton, 70 years old and retired owner of Thornton Construction in Boston. 20 years ago, I bought a beautiful oceanfront property in Florida as my retirement dream. After a recent health scare, I decided to rest there for a few weeks. My son Thomas and his wife Jessica had been married for 5 years, and I thought they would appreciate a surprise visit. I never expected to arrive at my own beach house to find Jessica hosting a party. Her first words still haunt me. "What is this old parasite doing here? We have no place for you." Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if family betrayal stories resonate with you. Life hasn't always been easy, but I've always valued hard work and family. My parents immigrated from Ireland with nothing but hope and determination. They taught me that success comes through persistence, integrity, and treating people right. Those principles guided me when I started Thornton Construction at 24. Over 40 years, I built it from a two-man operation into one of the largest construction firms in Massachusetts, employing over 300 people by the time I retired. My sweet Laura was by my side through it all. We met in college, married young, and faced every challenge together. When Thomas was born, our lives felt complete. Laura managed our home with such grace while I built the business. She was my rock, my compass, my everything. The worst day of my life came when Laura was diagnosed with breast cancer 20 years into our marriage. The disease was aggressive. While we fought it with everything we had, medical bills piled up faster than I could count. I never regretted a single penny spent trying to save her. After a 15-year battle, I lost her 3 years ago. The void she left behind is something I still haven't filled. Some nights I still reach for her in bed, only to find empty sheets. Thomas was our only child. Maybe we spoiled him too much, especially after Laura got sick. I wanted to shield him from pain, so I compensated by giving him everything he wanted. The best schools, expensive clothes, luxury cars when he turned 16. Looking back, I might have done him a disservice. He grew up kind-hearted, but with a sense of entitlement that worried me sometimes. When Thomas brought Jessica to one of my charity events 6 years ago, I was thrilled to see him happy. Jessica was stunning, with perfect blonde hair, a dazzling smile, and impeccable fashion sense. She seemed devoted to Thomas, hanging on his every word. As a father, I wanted to believe he had found someone who would love him as much as Laura had loved me. The wedding was extravagant, mostly at Jessica's insistence. I paid for everything without complaint. 400 guests at Boston's finest hotel, a 10-tier cake, and a honeymoon in the Maldives. Thomas worked as an executive at my company by then, and Jessica had quit her marketing job to focus on their future together. I didn't question it, though something about her never sat quite right with me. Over the next few years, I noticed subtle changes. Thomas called less frequently. When I visited their home, Jessica always seemed impatient for me to leave. She constantly mentioned their need for a bigger house, more expensive cars, exclusive vacations. I heard her once telling Thomas they could really use some of that beach house money when they thought I wasn't listening. I brushed it off as the natural distance that comes when children build their own lives. 3 weeks ago, I had a minor heart attack while working in my garden. The doctor said it wasn't severe, but at my age, they recommended taking things easier. Stress reduction was critical. That's when I decided to spend a month at my beach house in Naples, Florida. The property was my sanctuary after Laura died. 6,000 square feet of oceanfront beauty, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the sunrise over the Atlantic. Just being there always calmed my spirit. I didn't tell Thomas and Jessica about my heart attack. I didn't want them to worry, and honestly, I feared Jessica would see it as a sign of weakness. Instead, I decided to surprise them with a visit on my way to Florida. I stopped at their favorite bakery for pastries and bought Thomas a vintage watch I knew he'd admire. For Jessica, I purchased an expensive designer handbag she had mentioned wanting. I hoped these gestures would help bridge whatever gap had formed between us. As I drove my Lincoln Continental down the Palm Line Drive to my beach house that Friday afternoon, I felt optimistic. The doctor had given me medication that seemed to be working, and the Florida sunshine was exactly what I needed. I noticed several expensive cars parked outside the house, but assumed Thomas and Jessica might have invited friends for the weekend. They occasionally used the property when I wasn't there, which I had always encouraged. Family should enjoy the fruits of my labor, after all. What I couldn't have known was that those moments of optimism would be the last I'd feel for quite some time. The scene waiting inside my own house would shake the foundation of everything I believed about family loyalty. The driveway to my beach house was crowded with vehicles I didn't recognize. 2 Mercedes SUVs, a BMW convertible, and several other luxury cars lined the circular drive, forcing me to park on the street. I gathered the gift bags, grabbed my small suitcase, and walked toward my own front door, feeling oddly like a visitor. Music and laughter drifted from inside. Through the large windows, I could see at least 20 people moving about, drinks in hand. I hadn't expected a full-blown party, but perhaps Thomas and Jessica were entertaining friends for the weekend. I found the door unlocked and stepped inside. The grand foyer opened into the main living area, where well-dressed strangers mingled. The furniture had been rearranged, and several pieces I cherished were missing, replaced with items I didn't recognize. A large banner reading Annual Thompson Family Reunion hung across the back wall. Thompson was Jessica's maiden name. I stood there, luggage and gifts in hand, momentarily unnoticed. Then Jessica emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of appetizers. Her eyes locked with mine, and the smile dropped from her face instantly. She set the tray down with enough force that glasses rattled. "Angel," she said flatly, "what are you doing here?" Her tone carried no warmth, only annoyance. "I thought I'd spend some time at the beach house," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "The doctor suggested I rest somewhere peaceful." Jessica's perfectly manicured hand brushed a strand of hair from her face as she glanced anxiously around the room. By now, several of her guests had noticed our interaction and were watching curiously. "Well, this is incredibly inconvenient timing," she said through a tight smile. "We're having our family reunion this weekend. You should have called first." An older couple approached, and Jessica reluctantly introduced them. "Mom, Dad, this is Thomas's father, Angel." Her mother offered a cool handshake, while her father merely nodded. I could feel them assessing me, almost as if taking inventory of what possessions of mine might eventually become theirs. "So you're the father-in-law," Jessica's mother said, looking around at the house. "Jessica tells us you're rarely here. Such a waste for such a beautiful property to sit empty." "I try to come when I can," I replied politely, though something in her tone made me uncomfortable. More of Jessica's relatives gathered around, each introduction more awkward than the last. I heard snippets of their earlier conversations about finally having a proper beach house in the family, and Jessica's excellent taste in renovations. It seemed they all viewed my property as already belonging to Jessica and Thomas. Then came the moment that still makes my blood run cold. Jessica's cousin asked loudly, "Where will he be staying?" gesturing toward me, as if I weren't present. Jessica looked directly at me, her eyes narrowed. "What is this old parasite doing here? We have no place for you. Every bedroom is taken for the reunion." The room fell silent. Even her family members looked shocked at her bluntness. I stood frozen, gifts still in my arms, struggling to comprehend that my daughter-in-law had just called me a parasite in my own home. Thomas emerged from the back patio, drink in hand. Relief washed over me at the sight of my son. Surely he would set things right. "Dad?" Thomas looked genuinely surprised. "We weren't expecting you. Is everything okay?" Before I could answer, Jessica interjected. "Your father decided to show up unannounced during our family reunion. He knows this weekend has been planned for months." This was news to me. No one had mentioned any reunion. "I'm sorry, son. I didn't know about the gathering. I've been feeling under the weather, and thought some time by the ocean would help. I didn't mention the heart attack, not wanting to burden him in front of all these people." Thomas looked uncomfortably between me and Jessica. I could see the conflict in his eyes, but what broke my heart was watching him choose the path of least resistance. "Dad, maybe this isn't the best weekend," he said softly. "We've got Jessica's entire family here from across the country." "I understand," I replied, though I didn't. "Not really. How could my own son not make room for me in my own house?" "You might be more comfortable at a hotel," Thomas suggested, avoiding my eyes. "Just for the weekend. We can get together for lunch before you head back to Boston." Jessica smirked slightly, victorious. Her hand possessively gripped Thomas's arm as she added, "The Marriott down the street has excellent reviews. I'm sure they can accommodate you." I looked around at the room full of strangers, enjoying my home, drinking my wine, sitting on my furniture, while I was being asked to leave. The humiliation burned through me, but decades of business negotiations had taught me to never show weakness. "Of course," I said with all the dignity I could muster. "I'll let you enjoy your family time." I set the gift bags on a side table. "Those are for you both. The pastries might need refrigeration." As I turned to leave, carrying only my suitcase, I heard Jessica's mother say, "Well, that was awkward. Does he always drop in without calling?" I walked to my car with my head held high despite the tears threatening to fall. Only when I had driven several blocks away did I allow myself to break down. I pulled into a beach parking lot, put my head against the steering wheel, and wept like I hadn't since Laura died. This wasn't just about being turned away. It was the realization that the son I had sacrificed everything for couldn't stand up for me. It was seeing the naked contempt in Jessica's eyes when she called me a parasite. It was feeling like a stranger in the home I had worked my entire life to afford. Most painfully, it was the understanding that after 70 years of building a family, I was somehow alone. I checked into the Marriott that Jessica had so callously recommended, feeling a profound sense of displacement. Imagine owning 4 properties across the country, yet being forced to pay $200 a night for a hotel room because your own family wouldn't make space for you. The irony wasn't lost on me. The hotel room was comfortable enough, with its generic artwork and starched sheets, but it felt hollow. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared out at the ocean view that cost extra. It was beautiful, but not as beautiful as the panoramic vista from my own master bedroom, less than a mile away. Sleep eluded me that night. I kept replaying Jessica's words in my mind. "Old parasite. Is that how they saw me? As some burdensome creature feeding off them?" The thought was ludicrous. I had given Thomas everything, including a high-paying position at my company that he hadn't entirely earned. Jessica drove a car I had helped purchase. Their down payment for their Boston home had come from my savings. As darkness gave way to dawn, my thoughts drifted to Thomas as a child. After Laura's diagnosis, I became both mother and father to him in many ways. Laura spent countless days in hospitals and recovery, so I learned to juggle board meetings with school pickups and soccer practices. I remembered turning down a major contract in Chicago because it would have meant missing Thomas's high school graduation. I remembered the countless nights helping with homework after long days at construction sites. I remembered teaching him to drive, to shave, to tie a tie. Where was that boy now? How had he become a man who would let his wife disrespect his father so brazenly? When the first rays of sunlight streamed through the curtains, I reached for my phone and called the one person I knew would give me straight advice, Richard Goldstein. My attorney for 40 years and friend for even longer, Richard had seen me through every major life decision since I started my business. "Angel, it's 6 in the morning on a Saturday," came his groggy voice. "This better be important. I've been thrown out of my own beach house," I said simply. 20 minutes, and a full explanation later, Richard was fully awake and furious on my behalf. "I never liked that woman," he said bluntly. "Something about her always seemed calculating. Remember when she tried to get herself added to the deed of the beach house as a wedding present? I had forgotten that incident. Jessica had casually suggested that adding her and Thomas to the property deed would simplify things for estate purposes. Richard had firmly advised against it. "Angel, I don't want to alarm you, but given what's happened, I think we should look into Jessica's background more thoroughly," Richard suggested. "This level of entitlement and disrespect raises red flags for me." "What are you thinking?" I asked. "Let me make a call. There's a guy I know, Marcus Reynolds, retired FBI who does private investigation work. Very discreet, very thorough. Would you be open to having him do some digging?" Under normal circumstances, I might have considered this an overreaction, but being called a parasite in my own home had shaken me to my core. Something wasn't right about Jessica, and perhaps it was time I learned exactly what. "Do it," I said firmly. 3 days later, I met Marcus at a quiet restaurant away from the beach. In his 60s with silver hair and watchful eyes, he carried himself with the alert posture of someone who had spent decades in law enforcement. "Mr. Thornton, I have some preliminary findings you should know about," Marcus said after we ordered coffee. He opened a slim folder between us. "Your daughter-in-law wasn't born Jessica Thompson. Her birth name was Rebecca Sullivan. She legally changed it at 22. 2 years later, she changed it again to Jessica Thompson. Why would someone change their name twice? I asked. Often to distance themselves from previous identities or activities, Marcus replied. And in this case, there seems to be a pattern. Before meeting your son, Jessica was briefly engaged to Harold Winters, 82-year-old widower with significant real estate holdings in Florida. The engagement ended when Winters' children became suspicious and hired an investigator. He slid a photograph across the table. A younger Jessica, with darker hair, stood smiling beside an elderly man. Before Winters, she was connected to Martin Graves, a 75-year-old retired banker. She worked as his home health aide. Within 6 months, she was written into his will. His children contested it after his death, and the case was settled out of court. My coffee grew cold as Marcus continued outlining Jessica's history. A pattern emerged of an attractive young woman who sought out wealthy older men or their heirs, integrated herself into their lives, and ultimately benefited financially. There's one more thing, Marcus said, sliding another document toward me. I found this when looking into her communications. It was a printout of an email Jessica had sent to her mother just last month. Don't worry about money anymore. Once the old man is gone, Thomas will inherit everything. The beach house alone is worth $8 million. We've been working on getting Angel to put everything in a trust with Thomas as sole beneficiary. Just be patient a little longer. The email confirmed my worst fears. I wasn't just dealing with a rude daughter-in-law. I was facing someone who had targeted my family, my son, and my assets with calculation and patience. What now? I asked Marcus. We continue investigating. I want to look deeper into her past identities, any legal issues, her current activities when your son isn't around. And most importantly, we need to understand exactly what she's told Thomas about you. As I left the restaurant, I felt a strange mix of heartbreak and growing resolve. The betrayal cut deep, but I had spent my life building something from nothing. I hadn't succeeded in business by allowing others to take advantage of me. Jessica had clearly underestimated who she was dealing with. That night, I called Richard again with an update. We need to protect your assets immediately, he said after hearing about Marcus's findings. First thing Monday, we're setting up an irrevocable trust for the beach house and your other properties. We'll also need to review your will and business succession plans. And what about Thomas? I asked, the pain evident in my voice. Richard paused before answering. Angel, I know he's your son, and you love him. But right now, we have to consider the possibility that he's either complicit or being manipulated. Either way, we need to proceed with caution. I agreed, though it felt like betraying my own child. But as I looked out at the hotel room view I was paying for while Jessica entertained guests in my home, I knew Richard was right. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about standing up for myself and, in a way, for the values Laura and I had tried to instill in our son. It was time to find out just how far Jessica's manipulation extended, and to devise a plan that would protect what I had built without losing my son in the process. 1 week after our initial meeting, Marcus and I sat in a private room at his office, reviewing the extensive findings his team had uncovered. The conference table was covered with documents, photographs, and reports that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of my daughter-in-law, Jessica Thompson, formerly Rebecca Sullivan, formerly Melissa Jenkins, has quite the history, Marcus began, organizing several folders in front of him. She grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Philadelphia. Parents divorced when she was 12. Nothing remarkable until college, where she was expelled from her first university for academic dishonesty. That's when the pattern began. He showed me credit reports, court records, and social media histories that had been carefully compiled. Jessica had systematically targeted wealthy older men, or their heirs, for at least 11 years before meeting Thomas. In each case, she would integrate herself into their lives, isolate them from family members who might question her motives, and position herself to benefit financially. This is where it gets concerning for your situation, Marcus said, opening a folder containing emails between Jessica and her mother. These were obtained legally through our digital forensics specialist from accounts they didn't properly secure. The emails revealed a calculated plan that had been in motion since before Jessica met Thomas. She had researched wealthy families in Boston, focusing on those with single male heirs. My construction company and real estate holdings had made Thomas a prime target. What hurt most was reading how she described their first meeting at my charity event, an encounter I had believed was coincidental, but had actually been carefully orchestrated. "I got him hooked," she wrote to her mother shortly after meeting Thomas. "His father is loaded, worth at least $60 million. The son is naive and easy to manipulate. Within 2 years, I'll have a ring and access to the family fortune." Marcus then showed me evidence of Jessica's ongoing deception. There were emails to Thomas where she subtly poisoned him against me, suggesting I didn't respect him, that I considered him a disappointment, that I was becoming mentally unstable with age. In one particularly painful message, she had twisted an innocent comment I made about hoping to see grandchildren into a narrative that I was pressuring them and interfering in their marriage. "Has she been faithful to my son?" I asked, dreading the answer. Marcus hesitated before placing several photographs on the table. They showed Jessica with a muscular younger man entering various hotel rooms in Boston over the past 8 months. Other images captured them in intimate situations in what appeared to be Jessica's car. "His name is Ryan Carlson," Marcus explained. "Personal trainer at her gym. They meet at least twice a week, always when Thomas is traveling for business." The betrayal I felt now extended beyond myself to my son. Thomas might have disappointed me with his weakness, but he didn't deserve this level of deception and manipulation. "There's more about their financial activities," Marcus continued, showing me bank statements and property records. "Jessica has been systematically transferring funds from your son's accounts to private accounts, in her name only. Additionally, she's been pressuring Thomas to ask you to sign over properties to them directly." One document particularly caught my attention, a draft of a new will on Thomas's laptop that Jessica had prepared for me to sign. It would have left everything to Thomas immediately upon my death, bypassing the structured succession plan I had carefully created with Richard's help over decades. "And this is the most recent development," Marcus said, showing me emails between Jessica and a real estate agent. "She's been inquiring about listing your beach house, claiming they'll soon have ownership." My hands trembled slightly as I processed everything. The woman who had called me a parasite was herself the definition of one, latching onto my family and attempting to drain us of everything we had built. "What's your recommendation?" I asked Marcus. "Continue gathering evidence, but also secure your assets immediately. I'd also suggest confronting them, but in a controlled way that doesn't reveal everything we know. Sometimes giving people just enough rope allows them to hang themselves." I nodded, my mind already formulating a plan. "I need copies of everything. And I want surveillance continued, especially around my beach house." "There's one more thing you should know," Marcus added, his expression grim. "Jessica has been researching your medical history. We found searches on her computer about heart conditions, life expectancy after minor heart attacks, and even information about untraceable substances that can induce cardiac arrest." A chill ran through me. This went beyond financial manipulation into something potentially life-threatening. "Are you suggesting she might try to harm me?" "I'm saying we should consider all possibilities. Her pattern shows increasing boldness and impatience. I'd advise extreme caution in any private interactions with her, particularly involving food or drink she prepares." I left Marcus's office with a heavy heart but strengthened resolve. That evening, I called Richard and arranged an emergency meeting with my financial team, estate planners, and corporate attorneys. If Jessica wanted a war, she would quickly learn I was not the feeble old man she assumed me to be. The next morning, I began implementing comprehensive protections for my assets. The beach house and other properties were placed in irrevocable trusts with specific conditions that couldn't be altered even upon my death. My company ownership was restructured to ensure board oversight of any future transfers. Most importantly, I created a significant foundation that would receive the majority of my wealth, with Thomas receiving a reasonable inheritance contingent upon certain conditions, including divorce from Jessica. Throughout these meetings, I maintained a calm exterior, but inside I was shattered. Every new protection I put in place felt like another brick in a wall between me and my son. Yet I knew these measures were necessary not just to protect myself, but ultimately to protect Thomas from a woman who saw him only as access to wealth. With my assets secured, it was time to implement the next phase of my plan. I would need to confront Jessica and Thomas, but in a way that might open my son's eyes to the truth, without permanently destroying our relationship. It would require patience, strategy, and perfect timing. As I returned to my hotel room that evening, I found myself looking toward my beach house visible down the coastline, lights glowing warmly in the dusk. Jessica and her family were still there, enjoying the luxury I had provided, plotting against me. The property represented decades of hard work and dreams shared with Laura. I refused to let it become another trophy in Jessica's collection of conquests. Tomorrow would begin the careful execution of a plan to reclaim not just my property, but hopefully my son as well. The morning after securing my assets, I called Thomas. I kept my voice deliberately subdued, with just a hint of frailty. "Thomas, son, I wanted to apologize for interrupting your weekend with Jessica's family," I began. "I should have called first." "Dad, it's fine," Thomas replied, sounding relieved by my conciliatory tone. "We were just surprised to see you. How long are you staying in Florida?" "A few more weeks. My doctor suggested the warm weather might help my condition." I paused deliberately. "There are some matters I'd like to discuss with you and Jessica. Estate planning, the future of the properties. Would you both be available for dinner this week?" The mention of estate planning created an immediate change in Thomas's voice. "Of course, Dad. Jessica and I can make time whenever works for you. How about Wednesday evening? There's a nice restaurant at my hotel." Thomas agreed quickly, promising they would be there. After hanging up, I contacted Richard to ensure all legal documents were prepared for the next phase of my plan. "Are you sure about this approach?" Richard asked. "It's somewhat theatrical." "Jessica responds to money and status," I replied. "We need to play to her motivations if we want to reveal her true character to Thomas." Wednesday evening arrived, and I dressed carefully in one of my finest suits. When Thomas and Jessica entered the restaurant, I noticed her eyes scanning my appearance, likely assessing my health, and calculating how much longer she might need to wait for her payday. "Angel, you look wonderful," Jessica gushed with false warmth, air kissing near my cheek. "We've been so worried about you staying in a hotel instead of your beautiful beach house." "It's been quite comfortable," I replied, and it gave me time to think about the future. Over appetizers, I carefully mentioned several of my properties, including a mountain cabin in Colorado and apartment buildings in Chicago. Jessica leaned forward with poorly disguised interest as I discussed their values. "You know," I said thoughtfully, "at my age, one starts thinking about legacy. These properties require management, upkeep. We'd be happy to help with anything you need, Dad," Thomas offered, while Jessica nodded enthusiastically. "That's actually why I wanted to meet," I continued. "I've been speaking with my estate attorney about transferring some properties directly to you both, starting with the beach house." Jessica nearly choked on her wine. "Really? That's so generous, Angel." "Well, family is everything," I replied, watching her predatory smile. "I've scheduled a meeting with my attorneys next week to discuss the transfer. They'll prepare the paperwork." Thomas looked genuinely moved. "Dad, are you sure? That's an incredible gift." "I'm sure," I said, reaching across to pat his hand. "I'm not getting any younger, and I want to see you enjoy these places while I'm still around." Jessica could barely contain her excitement throughout dinner, repeatedly mentioning renovation ideas for the beach house and how they could finally make it their own. Every comment confirmed what Marcus had discovered about her intentions. After dinner, I returned to my hotel and called Marcus. They took the bait. Now we need the final pieces of evidence before the signing meeting. Over the next week, Marcus's team installed legal recording devices in my primary residence where the signing would take place. They also increased surveillance on Jessica, capturing numerous phone conversations with her mother and friends where she openly discussed her plans for my properties once they were transferred. "The old fool is finally giving up the beach house," she told her mother in one recorded call. "Once we have that, it will be easier to get the rest. Thomas thinks his father is being generous, but I know he's just tired of managing everything. A few more years, and we'll have it all." In another call to her lover Ryan, she was even more explicit. "Just a little longer and we can stop sneaking around. Once I secure these properties, I'll have enough money to leave Thomas and not worry about a prenup." Each new recording strengthened my resolve. This woman had not only manipulated my son and insulted me in my own home, but she was planning to eventually abandon Thomas once she had extracted enough wealth from our family. 3 days before the scheduled signing, I invited Thomas for lunch alone, a rare opportunity with him away from Jessica's influence. We met at a quiet restaurant near his office. "Son, before we proceed with the property transfers, there's something I wanted to discuss privately," I began carefully. Thomas looked concerned. "Is everything okay, Dad? Is it your heart?" "My health is fine," I assured him. "But I've been worried about you. About your marriage." His expression immediately closed. "Jessica makes me very happy, Dad. I know you two got off on the wrong foot, but she really cares about me." I could see Jessica's manipulation at work in his defensive response. Years of subtle poisoning had created a reflexive protection of her. "I'm glad to hear that," I said gently. "As long as you're happy, that's what matters to me. I just want you to know that whatever happens, I love you. Your mother would be proud of the man you've become." Confusion crossed Thomas's face at my unexpected sentimentality. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of my little boy again, the one who used to run to me with skinned knees and homework questions. "I love you too, Dad," he said, sounding slightly bewildered. "There's just one condition on the property transfers," I added. "I'd like you both to attend a family dinner at my house in Boston the night before. A small celebration with a few close friends before we sign the papers." Thomas readily agreed, unaware that this dinner would be the setting for the final act in exposing Jessica's true nature. The day before the planned signing, I flew back to Boston and prepared my home for what would be one of the most difficult confrontations of my life. Richard arranged for a notary and legal witnesses to be present, giving the appearance of a legitimate property transfer. Marcus ensured all recording equipment was functioning and had compiled the most damning evidence into a presentation. As I stood in my study looking at family photographs, including many of Thomas growing up and one treasured image of Laura holding him as a baby, I felt a profound sadness. No matter how this confrontation unfolded, innocence would be lost. Thomas would either have to face the painful truth about his wife, or choose to remain blind to it and lose his father in the process. Either way, tomorrow would forever change our family. The evening of our celebration dinner arrived with perfect early autumn weather in Boston. My home, a colonial-style mansion in Beacon Hill that Laura had lovingly decorated decades ago, was prepared for guests. I had arranged for caterers, formal table settings, and flowers throughout the first floor, everything needed to appear as a genuine celebration. Thomas and Jessica arrived first, exactly as I had planned. Jessica wore an expensive black dress with a diamond necklace I recognized as having belonged to Laura, jewelry I had given Thomas for his future bride years ago. The sight of Jessica wearing my late wife's precious necklace strengthened my resolve. "Angel, the house looks magnificent," Jessica gushed, air kissing me again. "I've always told Thomas we should visit more often." "Thank you for hosting this dinner, Dad," Thomas said, giving me a genuine hug. "It means a lot that you want to celebrate with us." Richard arrived next, followed by two of my closest business associates and their wives. Jessica looked momentarily confused by the small gathering. "I thought this would be a larger party," she whispered to Thomas, loud enough for me to hear. "Just close family and friends," I explained. "The people who matter most." To Jessica's evident surprise, her parents and two siblings arrived next. I had personally called and invited them, explaining I wanted to include Jessica's family in this important occasion. They appeared delighted by the invitation to what they believed was a celebration of their daughter's growing wealth. "We wouldn't miss this for the world," Jessica's mother said, her eyes darting around my home to assess its value. "Jessica has told us so much about you, Angel." During cocktails in the living room, Jessica proudly told everyone about the beach house they would be receiving tomorrow. Her family members asked pointed questions about the property value, taxes, and whether it came fully furnished. "And this is just the beginning," Jessica said, patting my arm condescendingly. "Angel has decided to start transitioning his properties while he can still see us enjoy them." The presumption in her tone made several guests uncomfortable, but they smiled politely. Thomas looked slightly embarrassed by his wife's forwardness. As dinner was about to be served, I stood and tapped my glass for attention. "Before we move to the dining room, I'd like to share something with all of you. A special presentation to commemorate this occasion." Richard nodded imperceptibly and dimmed the lights while a screen descended from the ceiling in the living room. Jessica looked confused but intrigued, likely expecting a sentimental slideshow of family photos. As you know, tomorrow we'll be discussing the transfer of my beach house property, I began. But first, I thought everyone should understand exactly how we arrived at this moment. The screen illuminated with the first slide. The real Jessica Thompson, followed by her previous names and identities. Jessica's face drained of color. "What is this?" she demanded, looking at Thomas for support. "Please, just watch," I said calmly, clicking to advance the presentation. What followed was a carefully edited compilation of evidence. Photos of Jessica with previous wealthy men she had targeted, court documents from disputed wills, and most damning of all, recorded conversations of Jessica discussing her plans for my properties and her intention to eventually leave Thomas. "I just need to secure the beach house." Her voice rang clearly through the speakers. "The old Parasite won't live forever, and then we'll sell it all." Gasps filled the room. Thomas sat frozen, his face a mask of shock and confusion. Jessica's parents looked mortified, while her siblings stared at her with dawning comprehension. "This is ridiculous," Jessica sputtered, standing up. "These are obviously fake, manipulated recordings. Thomas, we should leave." I clicked to the next slide, which showed photos of Jessica entering hotels with her lover Ryan, time-stamped on days when Thomas was traveling for work. The evidence was irrefutable. "Stop this immediately," Jessica shouted, but her protests only made her appear more guilty. "There's more," I said quietly. "Documentation of funds transferred from Thomas's accounts to private accounts in your name only. Searches on your computer about my medical conditions, and ways to induce heart attacks that appear natural." The room fell completely silent. Even Jessica seemed temporarily at a loss for words. I turned to my son, whose face reflected devastation beyond measure. "Thomas, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to believe this either. But I couldn't stand by while she manipulated you and planned to take everything we've built." Thomas looked up at Jessica, his voice barely audible. "Is it true? Any of it?" Jessica's strategy shifted instantly from denial to attack. "Your father has always been jealous of our happiness," she said, placing a hand on Thomas's shoulder that he immediately shrugged off. "He's a controlling old man who can't stand the thought of giving up anything. He's fabricated all this because I stood up to him at the beach house." "The beach house that you told your mother would be yours to sell soon?" I asked quietly, clicking to show emails between her and her mother discussing exactly that. Jessica's mother stood up, clearly deciding to save herself. "Jessica, what have you done? We didn't raise you this way." "Please," Jessica scoffed. "You've been asking about Angel's money since the day I met Thomas. Don't pretend you weren't counting on this too." The room erupted into chaos, with Jessica's family members turning against each other, all pretense abandoned. Throughout it all, Thomas remained seated, staring at the evidence still displayed on the screen. When Jessica reached for him again, he finally stood up. "Don't touch me," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "All this time, the trips, the late nights at the gym, you were with someone else?" "Thomas, baby, you have to understand," Jessica began, but he cut her off. "And you plan to leave me? After getting my father's properties?" The realization seemed to hit him in waves. "You called him a parasite, but you're the one who's been living off us." Jessica's face hardened as she realized her manipulation had failed. "Fine. You want the truth?" "Yes, I married you for your money. You were an easy target, so desperate for attention, so eager to please. Your father was the real prize, with all his properties and millions. I figured a few years with you was a small price to pay." The cruelty of her words hung in the air. I wanted to comfort my son, but this was his moment to stand on his own. Thomas straightened his shoulders, looking more like the man I had always hoped he would become. "Get out," he said quietly. "Both of you," he added, looking at Jessica's parents. "All of you." Jessica laughed bitterly. "You think this is over? We're married. I'm entitled to half of everything you have. And when we divorce, I'll make sure to take every penny." That's when Richard stepped forward. "Actually, the prenuptial agreement Thomas signed, which you rather carelessly didn't have properly reviewed by your own attorney, contains a morality clause. Infidelity with documented evidence results in forfeiture of all claims to marital assets." Jessica's face contorted with rage. "You won't get away with this. I'll sue all of you for defamation, invasion of privacy, everything I can think of. You're welcome to try, Richard replied calmly. Every piece of evidence was legally obtained, and I think the authorities might be quite interested in your searches regarding inducing heart attacks. Jessica grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door, her family following in embarrassed silence. At the threshold, she turned back. This isn't over, Thomas. You're nothing without me. After the door slammed behind them, the room remained silent. My remaining guests discreetly excused themselves, understanding that Thomas and I needed privacy. Richard squeezed my shoulder supportively before leaving. Left alone with my son, I watched as he moved to the bar and poured himself a generous scotch. He drank it in one swallow, then finally turned to face me. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his voice raw with emotion. "Would you have believed me?" I asked gently. "Jessica had spent years turning you against me in small ways. I needed you to see the truth for yourself." Thomas nodded slowly, tears forming in his eyes. "I've been such a fool. And the way I let her treat you, in your own house, I don't know if you can ever forgive me." I crossed the room and embraced my son for what felt like the first time in years. "There's nothing to forgive," I said, my own eyes wet with tears. We both wanted to believe in her. That night, Thomas stayed in his old room in my house. As I passed his door, I heard muffled sobs. It broke my heart, but I knew this pain was necessary for healing to begin. My son had lost a wife today, but perhaps he had found himself again in the process. The aftermath of that evening was both painful and liberating. Thomas moved into a guest room at my Boston home while beginning divorce proceedings against Jessica. True to her nature, she fought viciously, claiming emotional abuse and attempting to portray herself as the victim. Richard's meticulous documentation and the prenuptial agreement ultimately protected Thomas financially, but the emotional toll was immense. For the first few weeks, Thomas barely spoke. He went to work, came home, and spent hours alone in his room. I gave him space while ensuring he knew I was there. Occasionally, I would leave his favorite meals outside his door or books I thought might help him process his grief. Small gestures to remind him he wasn't alone. 1 month after the confrontation, I found Thomas sitting in the kitchen late at night, staring at old family photographs. "I keep trying to figure out when I lost myself," he said without looking up. "When I became someone who would allow my wife to call my father a parasite." I sat across from him, giving him time to continue. "I think it started after Mom died," Thomas finally said. "Jessica filled a void. She was so attentive, so concerned about my happiness. I never realized she was isolating me from you, from friends, from everyone who might see through her." "Manipulative people are experts at finding vulnerabilities," I replied gently. "Your grief over your mother made you susceptible." Thomas nodded slowly. "I've started seeing a therapist. She's helping me understand how I ended up here." This admission filled me with hope. Thomas was doing the hard work of self-reflection, something I feared he might avoid. Over the next several months, we began rebuilding our relationship. We established a standing Sunday breakfast, where we discussed everything from business to memories of Laura. Thomas started asking questions about my early years building the company, showing genuine interest in my experiences rather than just the wealth that resulted from them. As for Jessica, she eventually accepted a settlement significantly smaller than she had anticipated. After her attempts to challenge the prenuptial agreement failed, she moved to California, presumably to find new targets for her manipulation. I maintained security at all my properties for several months, concerned about her threats of revenge, but she seemed to understand that further action would only result in potential criminal charges. Thomas threw himself into work at the construction company, displaying a dedication and business acumen I hadn't previously seen. He initiated several innovative projects that showed he was finally taking ownership of his role rather than viewing it as an entitlement. 6 months after the confrontation, I invited Thomas to join me at the beach house in Florida. It was his first time returning since that painful day when Jessica had called me a parasite. "I can't believe I almost lost this place," Thomas said as we stood on the deck, watching the sunset over the ocean. "Not just the property, but what it represents. All those summers with Mom, learning to swim right there." He pointed to a calm section of water near the shore. "We can't lose the things that truly matter," I replied. "Places change, properties come and go, but memories and relationships, Those are what we must protect. That evening, Thomas surprised me by asking about my estate plans. Not out of greed, but genuine concern. "Dad, I want you to keep everything in your name," he said firmly. "After what happened with Jessica, I realized I need to build my own success, not wait to inherit yours." I smiled, recognizing the growth in my son. "I've already made arrangements. The beach house and other properties will eventually go into a family trust. You'll have access but not ownership. The bulk of my estate will fund a foundation in your mother's name to support cancer research and families affected by the disease." Thomas nodded approvingly. "Mom would have loved that." Over the next year, I became involved with a local senior advocacy group that supported elderly individuals facing financial exploitation or family estrangement. My experience with Jessica had opened my eyes to how vulnerable aging parents could be, even those with significant resources. I shared my story at support groups, helping others recognize warning signs of manipulation and teaching them to protect themselves legally. Through this work, I met several wonderful people who became close friends. Eleanor, a retired judge, whose daughter had attempted similar manipulation. Victor, a widower, whose stepchildren had tried to claim his deceased wife's assets. Martha, a former nurse whose grandson had emptied her savings account. We formed a tight-knit group, often gathering at my beach house for weekends of good food, better conversation, and the healing power of shared experience. Thomas sometimes joined these gatherings, forming his own connections with my new friends. He began dating again, cautiously, and with much greater awareness of his own boundaries. The woman he eventually introduced us to, Claire, was nothing like Jessica. A pediatric surgeon who had built her own career, she showed genuine interest in Thomas the person, not Thomas the heir. 2 years after the confrontation, I sat on my beach house deck with Eleanor beside me, watching Thomas and Claire walking along the shore. The same shore where Jessica had once called me a parasite and thrown me out of my own home. "You know what I learned from everything that happened?" I said to Eleanor as we sipped our coffee. "Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's an act of self-respect. And the hardest boundaries are often with the people we love most," she replied wisely. I nodded, thinking of how differently things might have gone if I had established clearer boundaries with Thomas years earlier. If I hadn't enabled his sense of entitlement through misguided generosity. "The other lesson," I continued, "is that it's never too late to start over. At 70, I thought my family story was largely written. Now I realize it's continuously being created, with new characters and plot twists I never expected." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water, I felt Laura's presence strongly, as I often did in this special place. I imagined her proud of the man Thomas was becoming, and the strength I had found to protect what we built together. I watched Thomas and Claire walking back toward the house, his arm around her shoulders, both laughing at something private between them. The sight filled me with hope that had seemed impossible 2 years earlier. Life continues to unfold in unexpected ways. The beach house that was nearly stolen from me has become a gathering place for new friends who feel like family. Thomas has grown into the man I always hoped he would be, learning difficult lessons but emerging stronger. And I have discovered that even at 70, there are new chapters to be written, new joys to be found, and new wisdom to be gained. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who tried to take advantage of you or your loved ones? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more accounts of overcoming family challenges and finding strength in difficult times. Remember, it's never too late to set boundaries and reclaim your self-respect. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to protect what matters most in your own life.